Hi everyone and welcome to today's Biology Daily Booster. This is number 11 in our Paper 2 series and it is advanced information listed topics for both those of you doing foundation biology and higher tier biology. What we're going to delve into today is the world of biodiversity. Biodiversity, quite simply, is looking at the variety of living things present in an area. And it's one of those things that's absolutely essential for having this balanced ecosystem. And we as humans need biodiversity in our existence because we get an awful lot of raw materials that we need from the range of living things that are present. We wouldn't survive if there were only a couple of living things. We need a reasonable variety. However, as much as we do need biodiversity, we are sadly the leading cause of the loss of biodiversity on planet Earth, and that primarily comes down to our ever-increasing population of humans on this planet. We're going to have a look at a few key ways that humans are affecting biodiversity first of all then. Any of you that do geography will be familiar with this one, deforestation. If we're talking deforestation, that's where we're removing large areas of forest. Think the Amazon rainforest, what we're doing there. Why do we do this? Well, we use those trees for building, for fuel, we're creating space for our farms, etc. Impact is going to reduce the number of trees, so that means we've reduced the actual supported animal species that rely on those trees. Not good overall, plus we're also reducing the trees, which means that we're reducing the organisms that remove carbon dioxide from our atmosphere, potentially leading to extensive climate change. Second thing we do is our agriculture. Reason that we're doing this because we need more food to feed our ever-growing population. So we've got to carry out this intensive farming of land to get enough food to feed everyone. The impact it has, well, first of all, we're removing hedgerows to make more space for our big machines. As a result, we lose certain species that are hedgerow reliant. We use a range of chemicals like pesticides. Now, pesticides kill pests, and that means we're removing food sources for some other organisms. We also use herbicides, they kill weeds, and that reduces the number of different plant species present, which can have knock-on effects on the food chain as well. Third one is hunting and fishing. Again, comes back to feeding our ever-growing population of humans, but also sport. Some people just like killing things. The impact, if we overfish an area, we can lead to actually losing a species completely from that area, or at least severely reducing their population. In addition to that, because we tend to use these massive nets that are just dragged behind our fishing boats, it's not just the one species of fish we were aiming at that gets caught in those nets. Any other marine organisms in the area can get caught in them too. Hunting. Big problem there is that we're going to affect food chains. You could remove a key organism from a food chain and therefore impact on others. Fourth problem we have is pollution. General rule of thumb is organisms don't like pollution. So the more polluted an area, the fewer organisms that can survive there. Good example of this is the process of eutrophication. Now, eutrophication occurs when the fertilizers we use on farmers' fields runs off into rivers and lakes. As a result, that water has a whole load of fertilizer. So algae, which is a type of plant that lives in our water there, has got everything it needs to have a population explosion. So that's what we refer to as an algal bloom. It blocks the light, so any of the plants in that river or lake are going to die. And then as they're decomposed by the microorganisms, oxygen levels decrease in the water, leading to the death of the fish as well. So generally very problematic. So we've got some problems around biodiversity. Most of them are human related, not going to lie. Now what we find then is when we are affecting biodiversity or we're doing things that can affect populations, first thing that we're going to probably do is make the species endangered. That just means there's only a low number of them left and therefore they are at risk of extinction. What do we mean by extinction? That means that all members of that species are dead. And yes, there are a large number of species that are now extinct, sadly. What can we do about it then? We're not just going to sit there and go, oh well, everything's going extinct, we'll just sit back and let it happen. At least I hope we're not going to. So we need to carry out what we refer to as conservation. Now, conservation is all about protecting a natural environment so that we're not losing habitats. Because if we protect the habitats, there's places for all of these organisms to exist, and therefore they shouldn't become extinct. In order to do this, we use a process of active management. That means that we as humans are doing things to protect that habitat. We might be using wardens, for example, in nature reserves to ensure no one's hunting when they shouldn't be. It might be things like reforestation, so replanting areas of trees that we've lost. The key thing about it, though, is that we're still allowing resources to be used in a sustainable way. By that we mean we can use the resources today, but they will still be present for future generations. One of the conservation efforts I'm sure you are aware of is captive breeding. Now, captive breeding programs are generally what we do in zoos these days. And the whole idea about them is to create this stable and healthy population of a certain species. Once we've got this population, we then aim to reintroduce it into its natural habitat. So I know that there's a couple of zoos around me where they do really good work with the gorillas, for example. So they've sent several groups of gorillas back to the wild now after they've bred them and then raised them, and at that point sent them back into the wild. So that's a successful captive breeding program. There are some problems. Firstly, there's an issue with maintaining genetic diversity. If there's only a very small number of these organisms left, there's not a range of breeding partners, your gene pool is small. That means you may have a lot of genetic problems and diseases coming into that population. Fall below a critical number, no matter what you do, that species is going to die out because the gene pool is just a little bit too small. Second problem we face is that organisms born in captivity may not be suitable for release. If they've been too dependent on humans for everything and they don't know how to exist as a wild creature, there's a problem for them. We may also have a situation where there's just no habitat to go back to. If we've literally wiped out their original habitat, where are we going to put them? It's not just animals that we're trying to conserve. Plants are pretty important too. Without plants, animals won't exist, the whole thing falls apart. So in order to prevent extinction of our plants, we use this thing called a seed bank. Now, seed banks, quite simply, are these massive storage units for seeds. And what we're going to do is store those seeds so that we can grow that plant in the future, just in case something goes a little bit wrong. And they're usually incredibly cold. There's one up at Kew Gardens that's quite impressive, and there's also some up in the Arctic Circle as well. So what we're doing is we're storing these seeds at really low temperatures, and you can see these little crates at the bottom there filled with seeds from all over the world with as many different species as we can. If a disease was to wipe them all out, we've got some seeds we could hopefully bring them back with. Something else we can do to try to conserve what we have left is we can actually bring in different agreements or laws. So this could be local or international, but in order to actually do this effectively, we need a much wider cooperation than just one little group in one country working on it. So we do have some international organisations here. The IUCN, for example, publishes what we refer to as the Red List, which just informs countries about what species are most in danger, and therefore which ones they need to focus their conservation efforts on. Then we also have the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna. This is just a treaty that regulates the trade of plants and animals and their products. So this is the kind of ivory bands that we've got. There was a big convention in Rio a good few years ago now, where countries came together and they agreed certain things. The overall aim was to maintain biodiversity. The way they agreed to do this is do things that are going to reduce desertification, to reduce their greenhouse emissions, and develop strategies for sustainable development. Now, we're still working on this. If you watch the news, you know it's still something they come together every once in a while as world leaders and say, yep, we're totally doing this. How successful they are varies country to country. We can have schemes that are more local. So rather than worrying about the international side, we can focus on our local area as well. So we can even do things like pay farmers a certain amount of money so that rather than growing crops in a field, they'll let it just be natural, so that that allows obviously a range of different species to live in that area for that time frame. There is this idea of ecotourism. Now, tourists can be a problem because they can be pretty stupid creatures. They will go and cause damage if not watched carefully or educated. But tourism is big money. So if we've actually got a way to bring tourists in to look at these wonderful animals, these beautiful nature reserves, etc., that are filled with this diverse range of life here on Earth, then that gives money to that area that can be used to improve habitats, to prevent poaching, to try to do things to maintain that biodiversity. Key thing though is that the tourists have to follow a few basic rules. You know, not wander around the breeding grounds and disturb the birds, the turtles, whatever. Keep on footpaths so you don't inadvertently trample the delicate plants. You know, don't do things like snap off bits of the coral reef to take home as a souvenir. Aside from the fact it takes a blooming long time to grow, it also is probably going to sting. You know, it's called fire coral. It's going to burn, folks, so don't snap it off. Downsides though, if we use the same hiking trails day in, day out, then we are going to have soil erosion there. So while ecotourism can be good because of the money it brings in that we can use for conservation, it's not perfect. We do need to be mindful of the downsides. So how do we monitor this biodiversity then? Well, we take samples of plants and animals on a regular basis to monitor the type and the number that are present. And a key group of these species we're looking at are what we refer to as indicator species, because these are organisms that we can use to measure the quality of the environment based on whether these species are present or if they're absent. So, great example, the good old canary, which we used to take down in the mines back in the days when we used to mine a lot. And the reason we did that was because they're way more sensitive to carbon monoxide than humans. So when the canary fell off its perch, you knew to get the humans out of the mine because there was a lot of carbon monoxide there. One of my favourite creatures, the nudibranch, these are great indicators of climate change. So those species, just by their presence or absence, tell us about the environmental quality. Something you need to know then, air pollution. Biggest problem that we have is really sulfur dioxide here that comes from the burning of fossil fuels. Leads to acid rain, which can obviously result in the death of trees, fish, etc. One of the best indicator species for air pollution is stuff called lichen. Because they don't have a root system, all the nutrition that they get comes from the air. So based on what lichens are present, we know the quality of the air in that place. Generally speaking, the lichens that are really kind of delicate and branched and very pretty looking ones, they will only grow in areas with clean air. The things that are probably the stuff you see around, look at the roof of a nearby house, the kind of yellow or white crusty looking thing that doesn't look appealing at all, generally grow where there's high pollution levels. In terms of our water pollution then, what we're looking at are when we see pollution released into rivers, then it affects the oxygen levels. Less oxygen means less species can exist there. So if we see mayfly larvae, it's unpolluted. If we're seeing sludge worms, we've got a big problem with pollution. So based on where these different species are present in the water, we can work out where the problem is. Because if we've got mayfly larvae at one point, and then a bit further down the river sludge worms, you know somewhere between that 2 points, then we've got a pollution indicator. If there's bits you want to go over in more detail, then head on over to the B6 playlist on the channel. You can obviously use your revision guides, use your classwork notes, and of course, don't forget to come back tomorrow for our next daily booster.